Hey everybody! How you guys doing? Good. Having a good show so far. Okay, so this is the presentation that I gave last year on prototyping. If you happen to have seen that, it was in a very small room, so that's statistically unlikely that you did. But it was the top 10 list last year, so booyah. So if you didn't see it last year, feel free to bail and I won't be horribly offended. But anyway. Okay, so my name is Lee Perry. I'm the gameplay designer on the Gears IP in general. And today I'm going to discuss basically, in a nutshell, how we make the game and how we use prototyping very extensively throughout our creative process. I'm going to talk about our design history with Epic and kind of how we got to where we are. Talk about how we came to this process and what kind of enabled it to be born. And then I'm going to show a boatload of examples from Gears 2 on things that we had prototyped, some that failed, some that succeeded, and talk about what went into those. And then I'm going to wrap up by talking about things we've learned from those processes, so that in the event you're interested in doing this sort of thing in the future, you'll be able to benefit from our mistakes some. So to start off with Epic's design history, I often liken us to the works of Salvador Dali from where we came from, because he's crazy. He's got elephants on stilts. The guy took a lobster and turned it into a phone at one point. He made sculptures of people from rhino horns, and he did some pretty random stuff. Then you've got the mind-bendingly talented Terry Gilliam, who does Time Bandits and 12 Monkeys and truly random stuff as well, but inspired but pretty random. I mean, you got dwarves running through time with a map of time from God, Robin Hood. And I mention these because they are only slightly more coherent than Unreal Tournament was. Unreal Tournament was completely just scattershot across the board, and the reason for that was that when we were working on these levels, and in general the game as a whole, people were all over the world, because Epic wasn't in a central office at the time. We had people in Canada who were making these kind of, hey, I want to make a Mayan level, and somebody else is going, I'm going to make a military level, and I like the Millennium Falcon, and some guy in Spain is building a submarine, and somebody likes castles on mountains and low-gravity skyscrapers in space, and lava castles, and I mean, come on, this is what the fuck? I mean, it's like Aztec temples on asteroids. So this is what the pyramids in space is where we came from. So that pretty much sums up the heart of our lack of design mentality in the day. Now don't get me wrong, because we did pretty good space pyramids in the day, and there were a lot of classic stuff in there, and people liked what we were doing. But we did not have a trend of making a coherent game design or anything that kind of fit. And so that worked out right for Unreal Tournament. But Microsoft comes along, and we know that Microsoft wants our next game, and this is great, and we got this new thing called the Xbox coming out, and this is pre-Gears 1, and well, they wanted Gears 1. But we didn't have a history of doing this well. We knew what we were doing was flawed, but we were just kind of moving into the same office and getting everybody working together. But we also didn't have a lot of time, because the nature of games, you got to make this Christmas season, and this is X amount of time out, and so we pretty much had to start anyway. So we kind of looked at what the rest of the industry had traditionally done, and we started making documents. We made documents, and we made concept art, and we did some models and renders, and we stuck them in a big old design documents, and you put those on networks or print them, and it's easier to print them, because that way nobody reads them anyway. And so we had no shortage of ideas for this thing. We had train levels, and we had guys buying guns on the battlefield and combat cache, and we had dragons, and we had lava levels, and suddenly it really started to seem really familiar. I mean, we were like a creative meeting away from Marcus Phoenix being a freaking space pharaoh. So this was our collision course. We knew where this road went. And part of our problem with how we got there was that we were depending on these documents that we were writing to try to coordinate the team together. And that was not particularly working well for us. And it struck us as odd because despite the fact that a lot of people worked with design documents and as the basis for how things get disseminated out to the team, we kind of jumped in where we put all this stuff together, we send it to the team, and it comes back, and it should work, and then in theory, what everybody else was doing was supposed to work, because that's what everybody was doing, but it absolutely wasn't. So some of the stumbling blocks with this was that we'd find if we put too much detail in a design document, nobody wants to read it. I mean, any forum can tell you that. You got more than 2 paragraphs, and you're like, yeah, skim it. If you don't put enough detail in a design document, there's almost no point in having it, because it's all ambiguity, it's all what people bring to the doc, and they're going to shoehorn in, everybody's creative, they want to shoehorn in their own ideas, and it's just a matter of that everybody, regardless of how well the document is written, brings their own perceptions to it. If you write a document that says we're going to make a fantasy game, I guarantee you everybody in this room has a different idea of what a fantasy game means. It's Conan, or it's EverQuest, or it's Warhammer, whatever. So regardless of how well it's done, there's too much reliance on the reader to properly interpret what you're trying to say. Also, we had this mentality at Epic now I don't mean this in a derogatory way of naysayers, but we debate like freaking high school debate teams, and you'd think our paychecks were dependent on the length of the emails we write to each other. It was like we are hardcore, like, but I caught you. What if the guy's mantling at the time when you flamethrow him? And it's ridiculous. And so we'd have these deadlocks nonstop, because you can read it, any design document, I don't care who wrote it, you can read it and you can tear it apart with hypotheticals. It just goes without saying. We don't have many programmers back in this day, and we still run a pretty lean ship, so we couldn't afford to, like, me write some design doc and send it off to a guy and hope that when he eventually got around to it, like a month later, that it comes back. I don't even remember what it was, because I'm just like, this is a stupid idea, who wrote this? And I'm like, oh, that's me. I mean, we don't have enough time to screw around, basically, with our programmers. And the other part of this is the iteration time, which is inherent in that. Something comes back a month later and it's not what you want. You're like, okay, I guess I'll make these revisions and send it off again to the machine. And here's kind of the bigger issue, almost bigger than all of that, is how we were utilizing designers. Basically, we had designers that were what I would call food critics instead of chefs. They get to make a menu, or they get to write something down, and then they send it to the kitchen, and it comes back and they critique it a little bit. And that's not how chefs work. We didn't have any kind of practical application for what made this guy more skilled or capable of making these calls than anybody else. It was all just critics and basically theoreticals. So we were floundering around in early Gears days with that. Simultaneously, at the same time, we started working on Kismet, which was, we knew that we were going to be making this single-player game, and we knew that there were going to be light switches and doors and people spawning. And, for the most part, those weren't things we did a lot of in previous Unreal or Unreal Tournament games. There was a lot of kind of reliance on very cryptic tools and stuff. But we knew we didn't want designers and level designers having to go hover over programmers' backs and say, okay, I want this light switch to activate this stuff. We needed more self-sufficient scripting tools for designers. And so we made Kismet, which was basically, I'm sure you've got some kind of familiarity with it, but it's, touch a trigger and it turns on these lights and that starts a loop and etc. And it was kind of our way of taking any kind of meathead like me. I was the initial test monkey for Kismet. And it was like, if Lee, who's never programmed anything, can make this kind of thing work, then we're onto something. Because I'm a very visual guy, and most of our level designers were as well. So it's like, how can we get programming kind of output from people who don't know how to program? And so we started realizing that this kind of logic of, I touch the switch, I turn on the lights, it spawns an enemy, etc. Really at a functional level, this is not very different from making a weapon where I pull the trigger and it spawns a light that's on the end of the gun and it causes some damage over there and there's some sound effects or whatever. I mean, they're really, really similar, but for some reason they're very much broken up into, oh, that's a level task and that's a game programming task, etc. So as soon as we started getting those tools online, I was sitting at my desk one day and I thought, it would be pretty cool if we had a larger enemy type. It was early in production, we had a guy with a gun. You were just fighting this dude with a gun over and over. And I was like, what if I scaled this guy up some, and I took a helmet and I attached it to his belly and put a helmet on his shoulders, and I gave him a little more health and slowed his speed down, and I dug through some packages and found some guy saying boom. And I slowed that down and applied it so he's going boom. And I just did this at my desk, and it took like 15 or 20 minutes of just jacking around. But this amazing thing happened was that when people were coming by my desk, and I'm like, haha, check out this big guy. And he walks around and says boom. Everybody's like, oh, that's great. We should put that in the game. It was awesome because we short-circuited the entire debate process that we normally did. I didn't actually have to pitch it to anyone. It was more like, what do you think of this? Wow, that's cool. Let's refine that and put it in. And so this is actually how we came about our big friend, the Boomer here. And it was kind of the first almost accidental use of what our design methodology would turn out to. So previously we had this whole process of, design it, write a big document about it, we debate the hell out of it. If we prototype something, it involves multiple programmers, and we've got to get an animator in there and a modeler, and let's get all that in there. And then the designer hopes it comes out like he envisioned, then everybody looks at it, more debate. And so basically what we kind of inadvertently ended up doing with the Boomer was we took this whole middle section of this, and we just boiled it down to just, what if I just did it? Instead, it was like I just kind of thought about it in my head, made it, and showed it to people. And from that point, I wrote a little document after that basically, documentation at that point turned into kind of like, this is the findings of this map. It was like, hey, we can make this guy, and he should have about 1,200 hit points, and he could move about 200 units a second instead of 3. And it was a lot more informative because these numbers weren't just things I pulled out of my head. Or butt. It was just like, okay, I know this is a cool value because I've actually played with this guy in a map. And so that was kind of what we call the birth of the POC process. And when I say POC, it's proof of concept. I'm sorry if I've said it previously before defining it, but POC, I say it all the time, it basically means prototype proof of concept map. So one of the cool benefits from this were that we could start off a prototype, and we would get things out of the prototype that weren't necessarily what we initially set out to prove, but they were valuable nonetheless. So one good example of that, in Gears 1, we had these moments that were, we call them forced talks, where we knew we didn't want a cinematic, but we needed to say some stuff to the player about what was going on. And so we made these little situations like this, where
what are you looking at?
there's some guy walking, and it forces the player to slow down, and he's talking.
Piece of crap.
At least maybe he's talking. I don't know who's talking. Is it that guy over there? I don't know who he's talking to. There's dialogue going on. That's all we knew. And it was pretty rough. And players eventually, when we shipped the Gears 1, were endlessly frustrated with these sequences, but they were kind of required. So, I mean, he's not even looking at anybody. It's like, I don't know what was going on there. I mean, of course I'm talking over it, but regardless. We knew this needed to be improved. So,
what are you looking at?
Are you still looking at? So, I wanted to come out with a new system. So, I wanted this thing that kind of basically put a camera in that would let you see who was talking and who they were talking to. And I wanted it to kind of pivot around in front of the person to kind of constantly align with that, with the subject of the conversation. I wanted to make sure the player could continue to move while this was going on in kind of an adventure game kind of methodology. And I wanted to be able to put a trigger in the world that said, this is the area of the level where this conversation can happen. And once they go out of that, the conversation needs to stop, etc. And I know that a lot of players want to skip dialogue sometimes, for better or worse, it happens. And so I wanted a method where if a player said, shut up, that we could do it cleanly. It wouldn't just cut off the dialogue and shut up. That there would be kind of a summary, because if there was an important bit of information, it's like, well, you really do actually need to hear this. We would record a separate kind of summary line that's like, I get it, let's move to the gas station or whatever. So, option 1 for this was, if I were to document, it would have the position, it would talk about where I want the camera to, how much time it would take, like the walking speed, all this stuff that would be required in a decent design document. You don't want to read this. I mean, this is a slide with a couple of paragraphs, but you have no interest in reading this. It's way too much. And even if it did, you still don't know if this concept is even cool in the first place. So rather than doing that, I just went back to my desk and I took this little test map and I made this.
What are you looking at?
It's like,
What
oh,
I did before.
that guy's talking to that guy.
Somebody who
I
lives
get
out
it.
here. It's gotta be.
So somebody else starts talking.
Runs.
I can stop controlling the guy. Cuts to him, that guy's talking. Ideally his face is tracking him, but you know, it's a rough approximation of this camera system, etc.
I'm looking for somebody.
The guy in the background, imagine that's Marcus. So you know who's talking now, you can see his reaction, etc. So without reading a whole bunch of crap, you have a much more clear idea of what I was going for. And at least we can start to evaluate, is that idea cool, not is your document cool? So one of the other things that came out of this was that we have two characters, and I use the term characters pretty loosely because one's a robot who opens doors, and one is a female on a radio who like gives you some mission instructions once in a while. But Jack and Anya were their names, and they didn't get much screen time at all, and we thought this was kind of a wasn't doing them justice. And so while I had this map open, I went ahead and kind of made this version where Jack is a little robot.
What I did before.
No. Sorry. Slide out of order. Where you got Jack here, and now he's in there with the squad, and when Anya starts talking, this little monitor is going to flip down, and it'll constantly track the player regardless of where it is. So you can see, hey, she's in some kind of operations center somewhere, kind of giving you directions.
You have two options, Delta.
And it at least kind of got this idea across that, yeah, you know, we can make both of these characters kind of seem cooler with us. And this wasn't initially what we set out to do, but it turned out pretty cool nonetheless. So, when we started trying to put this into an actual map, we came across the rather obvious issue that, you know, regular maps aren't big open canyons like that are. There's, you know, things in them. And so I started this other approach where, hey, I'm going to stick some cameras around and try to just go really adventure gaming. So I stuck a camera up in this corner and told it to track the player. So whoever's talking, the camera is kind of checking out. You can still control the player during this time. And whenever the player enters this other room, there's a trigger volume in there that says, hey, move the camera to this other corner instead. So, you know, you get a little camera cut.
What did I say?
You know, typical of things you see a lot in random adventure games. But you see Baird doing some goofy stuff there. And so we had a lot of issues with this. So, lots of issues. Mainly was that the issues of be careful what you wish for, because we wanted to spend a lot more time like showing people's faces, but we started to realize that despite the fact that the characters had a lot of detail, they did not have very good facial animation. And the requirements when you shove a camera right up in somebody's face to have that actually look good is really freaking hard. And bear in mind, this was like 6 years ago at the time, so it's still not exactly solved. So we discovered a lot of problems with that, as well as the kind of time it took to set these up. And so, I know what you're thinking, it's like, oh my god, why are you showing me a bunch of crap that you didn't actually put in the game? And like, this was like a kind of a failing. But it wasn't, because everything that I just showed you there, I did in one day in Kismet. All those variations were just me jacking around at my desk and having people come by. Somebody suggested, what if you try putting the camera in a fixed location, etc. So we got this whole exploration cycle out of the way, and we decided, you know what, we don't want to mess with this right now, given our timeline. We don't want to have to redo our entire animation pipeline to make this stuff look better. But we were able to make that decision based on, you know, some experimentation here that just took a day to do. And so ultimately, it was very valuable in that we knew we didn't want to do that, but we also got stuff out of it, like Jack and Anya, the little monitor thing under it. We ended up keeping that. We're like, oh, okay, cool. It's a little bonus for like, A for effort, and now you got some more character time. So that actually went in the game. That was pretty cool. So this was kind of an example of how the process started to kind of solidify itself. So we use this process a bit in Gears of War 1, you know, for a pretty good handful of things. But Gears of War 2 comes along, and this was tough, because Microsoft says, hey, Gears of War 1 is doing great. We want another Gears of War. You got 2 years. And we're just like, oh, that's great, 2 years. So naturally, the first thing anyone would do when faced with that problem is to take most of the team and move them off to Unreal Tournament 3, which had to be done in 1 year. And so it was like, hey, get that out of here. And so Gears of War 2 started with one gameplay programmer on the team for the first 6 months. And I guess technically he was the lead game programmer because he was it. So this was tough. So it was going to be up to the level designers that were attached to the project to basically prototype out all the new systems that we were going to be using at the time. And so this was, I don't necessarily know that the system would have been something we would have tried right out of the gate had it not been necessitated by our timeline. That it was like, okay, I guess we're going to give all these level designers a chance to go prototype crazy. But we ended up using Kismet and this kind of method to do a boatload of things, which I'm gonna run through some now. Some creatures, some weapons, some different gameplay systems, a bunch of level items. So one of the first things was that we were kind of being inspired by Mario quite a bit at the time, and I wanted our game to have a Yoshi in it. And so, like, the Gears of Yoshi was like, okay, well, so what is this thing? And so I took our old friend the Boomer and dropped one in a level, and I made him invisible. And then I attached 2 of these tentacles from another creature to his legs, and then I put this other little kind of critter, this ambient critter we had, and scaled it up and kind of attached it to his chest. And then I spawned this other guy and just kind of set him on top of it. And basically with a little bit of scripting, I was able to kind of make this. And there's like this creature, and if you get close to him, he'll make your head explode. And it's really, yeah, pretty nasty. But all of that was basically this invisible Boomer walking around, and he's got this trigger in front of him that if the player touches, then it does a bunch of damage to him, and the little creature that's mounted to his chest goes bleh, and it looks like he's biting your head off. We also wanted to be able to shoot the rider off. No, go away. We wanted to be able to shoot the rider off, and that would make it go faster, kind of get more angry. So he would rear up for a second, then it would run up to you, and again, if you're close to it, it would bite your head off. But it was pretty cool. I mean, it gave us the idea of like, okay, this is kind of a neat creature, because you could actually play it in this level, and the height of him, so he could shoot over cover, was pretty cool, and you could shoot the rider off, and he would get up and, you know, chase you around since he wasn't actually dead, etc. It was pretty cool, and we ended up putting this in the game eventually as this creature we called the Blood Mount. We also got on this bent for a while about, obviously Gears is a lot about getting into cover and cover dynamics and stuff, and we were thinking that it'd be great if more of our characters used cover as a mechanic of being a creature. And so we ended up doing things like this giant cover worm, we called it. And this is actually another invisible Boomer walking around, and he's just got this big snaky thing. And every couple of steps he takes, I spawn this like block of cover behind it. And then after a certain amount of time, it goes away. But it was a, you know, it's a really brutal, ugly, stupid hack. But it gave us a kind of a sense that, yeah, I guess it's kind of neat to follow around this creature, and you know, it's kind of a ambient creature as it was. But yeah, it was pretty. It worked out pretty well. So we ended up taking that and kind of running with it, and we made these creatures called the rock worms or cover worms, which ended up in the final game. The Reavers, which are kind of like our big flying squiddy octopus guys, in Gears 1 they were in a lot of kind of driving sequence kind of things on a train where they would fly up next to you and shoot you and stuff. But we wanted to take those guys and try to make them a more formidable kind of ground opponent, give them the ability to kind of land and do more stuff while they're in the air, and not just be kind of these background one-offs. Hello. Come on. So I took a combat area, I took a Reaver and put it on kind of a camera path. It flies over and it kind of bombards you. And on this next path, I shot the guy off, I shoot the guy, one of the riders off of it. You can see him kind of fall off in the background. Sorry about that. And then after it takes a certain amount of damage, it's going to kind of go into this, stab you as well when it flies over. But after you do enough damage to it, it goes into this kind of landing pattern. And once it lands, as you'll see here, it's the return of our old friend the Boomer. except he's invisible again. There's an invisible boomer there, and he's basically got a Reaver hat. This thing's just attached to his head. So he's got a Reaver hat, and these little leg things are just kind of physics things that are kind of being teleported around. And you can stick a grenade in one of them, and if you do it twice, it kills it. But ultimately, what you're looking at here is an invisible boomer with a thing stuck to his head. But it gave us enough of an idea that, like, hey, it's pretty cool to see this kind of formidable thing walking around the environment. And so that worked out pretty well, and we ended up keeping most of that and jacking it up in the game. We took a lot of this leg functionality from one of the big walkers that we had in Unreal Tournament 3, which also came from a prototype at the time. We were discussing, hey, we should have a big, tall, mechy thing in Unreal Tournament, and there was, of course, debate. No, we can't do walking dynamics and stuff. What we ended up doing with this was basically making those legs have negative gravity on them, but the feet are attached. So if you think of the world as upside down, this thing is just hanging by these three legs. And then as soon as we showed it to people, they're like, well, you're cheating. And it's like, who cares how it happened? It happened. It's awesome. Put it in. And ta-da, we got the big tripod walkers. And it ended up benefiting this as well. Back to our old friend the Boomer, we thought it'd be cool to make another version of him, where in this one he's basically walking around, and he's got this big shield that as soon as you shoot it, it kind of expands, like covers the whole body. And the weapon he's swinging around is also the weapon I'm swinging around. Mine's a grenade, but his is scaled up, and it kind of simulates, hey, I wanted to have this big flail thing. And so all that thing is just a stupid little matinee that's spinning it around, and if it gets close to you, there's a big explosion radius, and so basically it gave us enough of an idea that, like, yeah, this is a pretty neat little creature to fight. He hunkers down when you shoot him, and he tries to advance on you and fling at you. Now, it's not perfectly gameplay balanced at this point, but it was enough to show people this and be like, yeah, that's a really cool enemy creature, and it works with our kind of cover dynamics, and we were able to play with it in the sense that, you know, when you shoot this guy, he kind of pauses, and it slows him down until he gets within a certain range, and then he speeds up, etc. But it was all using, you know, basically level design tools, the same logic that we turn on light switches with and stuff. And of course, that ended up in the game as it was arguably one of the better creatures in Gears 2 for it. In the unintended kind of benefits of this, the shield, as soon as people started seeing that, and they're going, oh, shield, that's pretty cool. Hey, can I hold that? And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So we made a test map where we put the shield, and instead of attaching it to the big boomer, we just attach it to the player. And so in this one, when you tap A, he kind of deploys it, and you can walk around with it and shoot it. So we have a little Kismet action that detects when you hit A. And it was pretty cool, but we wanted to try something different where you had to aim. And so we opened up the Kismet, and I gotta say, instead of A, let's try the same button that aim is on. And so we kind of changed the controls around so that in this one, you pick it up, then as soon as you zoom in to aim, that's when it like deploys. And then when you un-aim, it kind of goes back and kind of stows again on your pocket. We like that one better. So we basically were able to make this control decision before we ever had a lot of people programming and coding a version of this. It was enough to make kind of a design call. And that ended up in the game. We ended up adding some other functionality to that as well, as the ability to stick the shield in the ground and take cover on it, and etc. But it ended up pretty cool. I read this article, you're going to think I'm sick, about some old lady who left a stove on and blew up her apartment. And I was thinking, man, that'd be a hell of a weapon. And so it was like in our never-ending quest to weaponize things. I basically made this gas leak gun where you fire it and it makes a bunch of fumes, and then a second later they ignite and blow up. And so anytime you've got tight corridors, like somebody's around that corner, you know, I just gas leak it, and, you know, blows up. Or there's a really kind of porous combat environment like this, some guys hanging out in there. Hey, portable gas leak, yeah. And all I'm doing there is spawning a bunch of cylinders in the world that have physics on them and a little kind of a cloud texture, and then a second later I spawn some explosions there. But, thank you, video feedback. Okay, so one of our kind of core tenets for Gears, though, is that our weapons are kind of Vietnam era, and they're very simple to grasp. I mean, it's a gun with a chainsaw, and I get it, I expect with it. And this kind of turned out a little more kind of difficult to explain. Every time somebody would pick it up, they're like, what's going on with this? And so that was kind of an indicator to us that it wasn't going to work out. So, fail, law cat just for Cliff, because he hates them in presentations, so suck it, Cliff. So what we ended up resorting on this was that Gears 2 had just a normal flamethrower. We took this and we basically said, okay, it's pretty cool, but let's just like kind of simplify it down to something that people expect in terms of, yes, it's a flamethrower, but we have the advantage of cover, and you've never blind fired a flamethrower over cover, so it's still got kind of a unique spin on it. But again, it allowed us to experiment with something. One of our other core kind of tenets for Gears was always that obviously we take cover a lot. And we have this term called fuzzy cover, which is anything I would take cover on that wouldn't particularly stop a bullet very well. Like I don't want to take cover on a houseplant, it's dumb. And tables and things like this are made for particularly bad cover. So we thought it'd be cool if there were kind of this active way that I could take cover on something like that, and then he would like knock it over so that it would become appropriate cover. So a table like this, you can hop in it, and depending on which side you get on, fling some stuff in the camera, and hey, now it's good cover. And it let us figure out that it's cooler if it flips towards you so that it's a more solid piece of cover instead of kicking something over. So that was pretty successful. This was a rare case of we liked the prototype so much that it worked that we pretty much just ended putting this into levels. We actually ended up not going to programmers at all. We just took the prototype, packaged it up, and said, hey, put this in some levels. And it's like, hey, feature, great. And, you know, it was just jacking around for a day on my desk. Obviously, with Gears, we have a lot of cover where you're, you know, shooting over stuff, but we also have a lot of tall cover where you go up to the edge of like a building, you poke around the side. One of the problems with tall cover is that they don't let you see the battlefield much. It obscures much. People can flank you. You don't really know what's going on with tall cover, so we used it less. So this, we made a prototype for, like, you can shoot around the side, but some cover you can hop up on and like shoot over it. And the animation for this, I didn't have someone animate it. It's just the start of the ladder animation. He jumps up to grab it wrong, but then I just swapped to that mode, and that's an existing mantle animation. I basically went and I scavenged through his animation folder to try and find some stuff that kind of sort of worked for it. And it gave us enough information to kind of judge that some of the problems with this is that we liked the fact that our game had very obvious chest-high cover, and it was very clear in a game like, yes, I can take cover on that, and we didn't have to make the distinction of like, is that perching cover or tall cover? We kind of liked the simplicity of it, so we ended up not going with this and failed. So I am like this close to just making a very complicated GDC presentation called "If you can make an elevator, you can make a game." Because any level designer who's actually made a functional elevator realizes that like almost every aspect of making a functional game is used in making an elevator. You got buttons, you got things on movers, attaching to things, animating things that are attached to it, moving lights, etc. And so one of the kind of proofs of that is this next sequence, which is the Reavers that were those big flying kind of squiddy creatures. And we're like, it'd be really cool if we could ride one of those, which if I just wrote a design document, yeah, I want to ride one of those, you're thinking, hey, I want to pilot it and do all kinds of crazy stuff. But really what I was saying is I want an elevator that looks like a Reaver. And so if an elevator goes up and down, it's on a path, so instead of going on a path, I can move it around the level and I can sit on it. Then we have these turrets, so I bring the turret along with me on my invisible elevator ride. And in no time, basically, I had this little short prototype of me on an invisible elevator with a turret facing both ways, and I can swap forward and back. And it's a scripted sequence where, you know, it gives me an idea of whether it's, you know, what kind of complications this is going to make for the game in terms of, you know, hey, can I shoot people on the ground? Is it fun to ride this thing around and try to engage ground targets? Hey, there's a guy shooting, etc. And it also let us kind of test out this canyon shooting thing. But ultimately, I'm basically riding an elevator, and it's got a turret on it, and it's not going up and down, it's going forward and back instead. So, I mean, it's a good example of the fact that like things can often sound way more complicated than they actually are in order to like just see if it's a cool idea. And that ended up in the game. We made a giant level. That was it. And it was a very pretty section of the game. And one of the last sections here. So imagine if I wrote a design document that we've got this level that's set inside of a giant worm, and you got to kill this giant worm, and how are you going to do it? Well, I want to attack its heart, and I want to be able to chainsaw this thing's heart, and then, but you could die from drowning in blood. Your mind reels at the kind of crazy edge cases that would make something like this not work. But we had some kind of nasty textures, and I took some placeholder meshes. Right over here in this map is an invisible little enemy called a wretch, who I can chainsaw. And if he dies, I turn on some blood effects on the screen. And then there's a moving platform, elevator, on the ground here that has a blood texture on it, and it starts lifting up, and if it gets to a certain degree, you die. But hey, there's another wretch over here, and I chainsaw him, and turn on some more particle effects. It's basically, can I run around the room and chainsaw 4 invisible wretches before the elevator reaches the next floor and kills me? But if I explain it that way, it sounds pretty trivial, but when you see it, it's like, oh, okay, this is a really cool sequence. It's kind of dressed up and disguised as something more than it really is technically. And it's nasty. And definitely the nastiest thing we've ever done. But we ended up doing it. We actually put 3 hearts in the giant rift worm thing. But again, I didn't have to convey what I wanted through some big document. It was, hey, here's a little video of this room, check it out. And people were like, oh my god, that's disgusting. So yeah, pretty disturbing. Sorry about that. So we did it. We pulled off Gears 2 in 2 years. We didn't get any other programmers on the project until 6 months after we were already in. By that time, we had this library of prototypes that we were like, hey, we were picking and choosing from. I would estimate that we probably went with about 40% of what we ended up creating for it. But it was a spectacularly good use of time to have all these random level designers, which otherwise would have been doing God knows what, just making shells for some imaginary game that we don't know what we're filling them with. Yay, Christmas was safe and kids were happy. Kids of legal purchasing age, a mature title. So now I want to talk a little bit about what we learned from this process, and if you want to do something like this, what kind of a best practices for making something like this work. For making a proof of concept, now I say it needs to be created by one designer, but I use the term designer very loosely here because a designer in this case is just anyone who feels like picking up a tool and making a very quick prototype. Doesn't have to be somebody who has a business card that says freaking designer, because most of our prototypes are made by artists and level designers and coders, etc. You don't have to be like, yes, you can make a prototype and you can't, etc. But the goal is that it involves very few people, so that you're minimizing a whole lot of churn. Just let somebody put something out there and take a look at it. It's got to come online very quickly, and the reason for this is the more you start to do this, not just from a production aspect that yay, faster is better. It's that you get married to an idea. You spend a week working on a prototype or 2 weeks working on a prototype. You've kind of got this buy-in going to like, I hope this turns out fun. Whereas if it's just a day's work, like the camera stuff, even though we iterated on several times, we're like, you know what? No, punt. And it was just because it came online quickly that we were able to do that. Using existing assets is very important. Because this kind of plays into the effect that it needs to come online quickly. If I run around the office waiting for an animator to, hey, can you make me an animation of somebody hopping up on a wall and shooting over it? Or can you make me a model of a big heart or whatever? Then I'm blowing my first 2 cardinal rules of minimal people involved and get it online quickly and be willing to throw it away. But it's also important that you be able to iterate on this stuff fast. So we knock out something quickly. You got to be able to show it to people when they're walking around the office. Like, hey, Matt, dude, come in here and check this out. And you're like, oh my God, I'm cutting his heart. What's wrong with you? And so you got to be able to take feedback in and cycle through it very quickly. No, I probably shouldn't just use the word feedback, because when I say it needs feedback here, I'm talking about something completely different. Feedback here I'm talking about is, imagine the first time you played Mario 64, or a game where the moment you're running around the world, there's great footstep sounds, and there's great clouds behind your feet. When he's just running and he's going woohoo, and the camera's got little camera shakes when it jumps, etc. All those little bits of feedback, they seem like polish, but they're not. We're constantly like, yeah, we'll add that stuff later. But later never comes if you don't hook somebody on an idea quickly. So all this stuff on here, we try whatever you can get in fast, such as the boomer when he's near you, the camera's shaking or whatever. Anything you can do that makes it feel like a cooler thing is key, because that's ultimately all we're doing, is trying to sell an idea across for these things. And when you think you've got more, put more in. Every clever trick you can. If you've got camera shakes, if you've got access to a sound library, if you've got screen effects, everything you can, put as much as you can, because it is ultimately what we're trying to do here is salesmanship of an idea. You're trying to represent an idea to your team as well as possible. The tools that we need to do this, this was pretty startling, because when these tools started to come online, with a handful of tools, with the ability to, like I said, elevator tools, if you can attach an object to someone, if you can attach a trigger to someone, if you can play a sound and cause some damage, you can prototype a huge amount of stuff. I mean, just damn near any kind of weird enemy you can think up in your head, you can pretty much do by taking some other enemy and bolting some parts onto them, at least well enough to convey that, like, yeah, it would be cool to have a cat, like, with a ninja sword. Okay, that's a bad example. I guarantee you I could prototype a cat with a ninja sword, though. Anyway, but yeah, it ends up not taking as much as you would expect to have a pretty robust set of tools. But the main trick here is that it's accessible to people who don't necessarily program. So there's all these people on our projects that are designers or artists who get into the game industry because they have creative game ideas. They want to be able to draw some crazy creature and then kind of see it, visualize, and see what it would really be like. And so the sooner you can get those people able to actually implement something, even if it's butt ugly or like really broken, but if they can get the first steps of showing it to somebody in a playable form, you'll be amazed at the kind of things people can turn out. Because there's so much like just pent up creative energy for people out there who previously have not had the programming knowledge to create something. And it's also very important for the tools to be able to something that you can preview and iterate on. You don't want to have to process things for an hour, compile it, or whatever. So some of the things we learned about the actual people who are doing prototypes is that obviously being creative helps. There shouldn't be a big shortage of creative people in your office, but it has to be said. It really helps if people are cross-discipline in that, like I said, I don't want to have to go to an animator to get something, I don't want to have to go to a modeler to get something, but whoever's doing a prototype, if they have a skill or two to bring to the table that they can use to improve their kind of salesmanship thing quickly, then it's all the better that the result of those people's work is going to be. So it's very handy if they have some other background. It's very nice for somebody to basically be in the mindset that they can sift through a bunch of assets or package from a previous game, or find something in some stock library or whatever, that they can basically sift through the garbage bin and say, okay, yeah, here's a severed hand jib, but I'm going to turn it into a five-headed Hydra thing or whatever. That basically they're able to improvise with what they have and not necessarily have to request a bunch of stuff. So the ability to improvise and scavenge is super key for the process. As I mentioned, the feedback plays into this. Is ultimately what you're doing is trying to convince people that you've got a cool idea. So it really helps if people get into the fact that they're not just making a sterile level with, this is this thing and there's no sound associated for it. I mean, if you've ever tried to play a game with no sound, then you realize how key it is. If any of these presentations didn't have sound, I guarantee you that 2/3 of them would have died before anybody ever gave them a time of day. So somebody who can really value the fact that they're trying to put a grin on the face of whoever's looking at their work. We call the people internal ambassadors, who are the people on the team who really get what you're trying to go for. I mean, with Gears, it was about cover and Vietnam-era weapons and stuff. I mean, with these tools, you could prototype a lot of stuff. I mean, you could prototype, Ninja Cat if you wanted, but it's very important for whoever's doing this, since there is a good deal of creative freedom in what they're working on and kind of short investment period. A lot of times it's easy to kind of go off the rails and you're one step away from Space Pyramids again, where it's like, I want to make the Millennium Falcon level. And it's like, yes, you can, but quit it. Back to kind of the naysayer personality types, which is not necessarily a permanent personality type. We all do this from time to time because we're all kind of natural-born skeptics and to some degree. But it's very important that whoever's working on a prototype be a person who's going to see something blocking their path and say, oh, no, we can't do it. They need to be able to say, oh, there's this other way we can do it. You don't want the person who's saying, no, we can't make mechs, to be the person responsible for prototyping mechs. I mean, it's like, okay, you don't believe we can do it. Give it to this person, because they're gonna try things that another person is gonna be blocked on. It's very important to kind of have that mentality with the people who are working on a prototype. There are pitfalls with this system. Probably more than anything, is all this stuff I showed you is basically just a design doc starter. I mean, this isn't stuff you would put in a game for the most part. It's one or two exceptions or whatever. But all this crap is ultimately to get people excited enough about the idea to move forward with it. And so the process that happens from when you would normally have everybody bought in on the idea and going, there's benefits to this, and that, you can get a lot of data out of it or whatever, but, it's not a miracle solution for now you can make your whole game with prototypes. But it is a damn fine way to basically get people to buy into an idea, and that's ultimately the biggest value of it. But it's, it's important to kind of keep that realistic scope on what we're doing here. It's like you're making a cool design doc, it just happens to be in a video form, because you can convey so much more information through 15 seconds of video than you can a stack of paper. It's very important that you keep coders involved in the process, because it's very easy that you can find gameplay programmers who they don't want to feel like they're just cleaning up somebody else's badly written, not actual code. But like I said, whoever's doing these, there's nothing to say you can't have gameplay programmers who are doing prototypes as well. But it's important to have a lot of people involved in the process, and that they have a creative outlet as well, that it's not, here's this guy, and he's going to make all the cool stuff we're going to do in this game, and everybody else is like, I'm just the code bitch now. You really got to avoid that. It wasn't so much of a problem with Gears 2, because we didn't have any. But in subsequent projects, in Gears 3, we definitely found that we needed to have more people involved in the process, because it's a very tricky kind of political situation depending on your team. And I should go back to that also. Some programmers like a lot of detail, some like a general direction. So that's your team dynamic waiting to happen there. Prototypes are ugly. As kind of cool and like, yeah, I can see the potential on that. It's not something you're going to like run around and fish out to publishers probably. I mean, this is like internal salesmanship, internal within the team. So just keep that realistic expectations. And kind of what I touched on earlier, one big kind of con that can happen is you're giving people a lot of freedom with tools. When they get used to the tools, you'll have people making mini games and giant boss fights that are like, what are you doing? That's not at all in line with our game. Just Space Pyramids, watch out for them. Typical with what I've said earlier about kind of make sure they're short. Don't be afraid to throw these things away. Don't get attached to a prototype, because sometimes you can make a prototype that's actually really cool and still not a fit for your game. But just because it's a polished, like, neat idea, keep the bigger game direction in your mind. And don't be afraid to throw stuff out. Just spend a lot of time on it beforehand. Naturally, there's always going to be some tools and training for getting people up to speed on this. whenever we would get a new level designer on Gears 1, I was a lead level designer in Gears 1, so I'm intimately familiar with this. Every time somebody would come over, I would fire up Kismet, I would grab him at my desk, I would show him, here's the trigger, and it goes to these lights, and here's 5 lights in a test map, and you can spawn a guy here, and this is what a delay does, and this is what it kind of... I'd show him about 10 different things, and I'd be like, go over to your desk for a day or two, and just jack around with it. And without fail, every single person that we randomly did that with came back with some ridiculous... It's like, man, you've really been sitting on some pent-up creative energy, because these people would come back with, okay, now this wall explodes now, and this vehicle drives through the wall, and these guys pop out of the back, and they come charging out. It's amazing how much, when you finally give somebody the ability to execute something, it's amazing what they can turn out. So there is training involved, but it's often not as much as you would expect. And I'm not going to say everybody hooks up on it, but I guarantee you, statistically, we didn't just happen to find everybody who did this well. Like, I find that very hard to believe, but we've had a very high success rate with giving people the ability to do this. Even with easy tools, some designers still, don't get it. There's still value and worth in designers who basically are kind of food critics, people who get it and are accessibility nuts and get how things feel. Those, certainly not saying that there's diminished value there, but some people there's different types of designers out there, so just something to keep an eye on. So, presuming that it's something you want to bring into your project, some tips are kind of my higher level here is to rethink what needs to be involved in prototyping something. Do we really need 4 programmers, an animator, and a modeler involved to see if a rhinoceros that leaves a chain link fence behind it is cool? I mean, it's like, well, no, just beat on it a little bit, enough that you can see, yeah, this is a cool idea, we should follow up on it. If you need to make a really functional early version after that, I mean, great. Consider that version 1 of the feature or whatever. But don't do that as the first step of the creative process. Rethink, who the designers are and what their roles are. Do you need 10 food critics on your team, or do you need just a couple of people with tools to actually try and make things? I think you'll find that most designers, generalist designers, have gone their entire career, especially ones who went to school and kind of had ideas, painful ideas thrown in their head, that write up your dream design document. And you get designers who will write these big documents and then they just walk around like peddlers, like, you, sir, will you build my dream game? How about you? How about you? And please make my ideas come true. I know they're good. And again, just rethink that process. If those people can get some tools and you'd be like, dude, no, go build it yourself. Here, let me show you. Redefining what a designer's role is on your project, from peddler to actually like implementer, is a huge thing. Find these people. Like I've said, we've had a lot of them on our team. But if you can find just even a couple of them and give them a way to kind of let out all this creative energy, you will inevitably be surprised with what they end up turning on. Obviously, get some tools that allow this stuff to happen. Get some tools that allow fast iteration. It's the Epic booth, so I'm like, yeah, Kismet, woo! Even if you're not using Unreal, you could probably, haven't tried it, you could probably pair up a designer and a programmer and see if you can do a fast iteration programming time with somebody, and just give somebody a day, get all game jam on their ass and be like, oh, go make this in 24 hours, go! You can still use the mentality regardless, but the tools definitely help. You can find some contentious case on an existing project. I guarantee you, whatever game you're working on, you've probably got some stuff you're either unsure about or people are butting heads about. If you can find one thing that is something you could easily prototype, you can very quickly see the value in being able to point at an example like, hey, this thing functions, it's fun, I've played it. Or no, that's really broken, I can show you. Find some way to make that happen. You might not necessarily have previous games that are in whatever technology you're using, but finding assets from previous things or unexpected places is important. Find a junk bin somewhere that will at least allow you at least a handful of, hey, these are some cool sound files, or these are some simple models. But often prototypes can be pretty cool, even if they're spheres and cubes and rectangles. You can still do some pretty cool stuff with them. Ultimately, find a way to take more risks, not big project risks. Like, what if we made the entire game about this system or whatever? Find a way to take your project and make a lot of little risks, because regardless of who is, I don't know, maybe I'm undervaluing like the big brain designers or whatever, but I doubt most people are able to kind of predict what people will like most about your game. And so if you can find a way to take lots of little risks within your project, you'll find that, oh man, this little dynamic is really cool. I mean, we didn't have cover when we started Gears 1, and we kind of started messing with that, and we were like, oh, this is freaking great. We didn't have a shotgun in Gears 1 until much later, and the online community is like, oh my god, we love the shotgun! But it all came from like this same process of, let's try some stuff. And ultimately, as I've said many times, I will end you with this. If you can give the creative people on your team an outlet, you will find that there is so many people who have been kind of just unable to make their own kind of destiny come true. And so give the people a way to do it, and you'll be happy with what you end up. So, there we go. And any questions or anything? I think we're a little short on time, but
what's the future? What's the future, Gizmo? What are you guys planning on adding in there?
Oh man, can I talk about that? Okay, so one of the we're trying to bridge the gap conceptually, choosing words very quickly, with stuff you're doing as prototype and stuff that you can actually put in a game. Stuff that is easier to debug, and that, like, if you just put a little more polish into this prototype, then you might actually have something you can ship with. And so trying to kind of further down that direction of, because right now it's very challenging right now to take something like a prototype and package it up and actually put it in levels. There's all kinds of weird dependencies. It wasn't built for that.
Right.
And so, I mean, ultimately all of this is a bastardization of a tool to turn lights and shut doors. And so it kind of yanks off course or whatever. And so in the future, I mean, I at least would love to be able to say, here's a creature and it's got these behaviors, and now I package it and I can spawn it with this event over here or whatever. And yeah, just better implementation with that stuff. So
very cool.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm outside here, so if anyone wants to hang out and ask questions or whatever, by all means.